أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال لقمان لابنه وهو يعظه يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم آمنا به صدق الله العلي العظيم. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Continuing our discussion on Surah Al-Luqman. In this particular verse, or in this particular ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to examine the different wasaya, the different advices that Luqman delivers to his son. And what's interesting is when you examine this particular verse, it may appear to seem that Luqman is beginning to advise his son with the first piece of advice, which is Ya bunayya la tushrik billah, inna ash-shirka la dhulmun azim. He says, "Oh my son, do not engage or do not even entertain the thought of shirk, of associating anything or anyone to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." But in fact, if you look at the verse closely, you realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to two elements in this particular verse. One of them being the area of shirk. But that's not the first piece of advice that Luqman is sharing with his son. Or in other words, rather I should say, it's not the first piece of advice, it's not the first wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us with. In fact, before that, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ يَعِذُهُ, the concept of maw'idah is the first piece of wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares within this verse. Maw'idah is the style in which Luqman utilizes to speak with his son. It's a practical approach of how one should advise another. As in, observe the verse. Think about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have very easily said, وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِإِبْنِهِ, and when Luqman said to his son, and then carry on by saying, يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ. And then observe or go into the first piece of advice, which is the advice of shirk. But no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it clear. He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِإِبْنِهِ, Luqman said to his son, وَهُوَ يَعِذُهُ. Allah highlights this and He makes it very clear that the style of advice that Luqman begins to share with his son is what is known as maw'idah. And therefore, with our discussion, or the time that we have together today, is to examine the concept of maw'idah. And as I mentioned very briefly, maw'idah is a practical method, it's a practical way of advising a particular person. When you look at, for example, the different concepts and elements that is involved when advice takes place, when preaching or admonition takes place, there are particular adabs that need to be adhered to. There is adab for the one who seeks advice, and there is adab for the one who gives advice. Islam goes into these intricacies, and most of these intricacies and most of these adab is in correlation to the aql, is in correlation to common sense. So for example, when it comes to a person who wants to seek advice, one of the pieces of, one of the adabs of seeking advice is do not seek advice from anyone and everyone. Go and refer to those who are wise in that particular area, those who are experienced in that particular field. Speak to the ones who know, because they'll be able to guide you to what to do and what not to do in that particular area. Or, for example, do not seek advice from many people at once. Because if you are in a position where you need advice, it means that you are confused and you are looking for a solution. If you go around asking each and every person, for example, if you're asking a lot of people who are experienced in the field, then you will have a variation of different opinions, and that will make you more confused than you were before. A person who is giving the advice, likewise, according to the Holy Quran, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idatil hasana." And when you give advice to others, then make sure it is of that of hasana. Make sure it is good. Make sure it is kind. Do not bring down the people that you are advising. Do not insult them. Do not shout. Do not scream. Do not use foul language, for example. Islam incorporates all of this. And the idea of seeking advice and giving advice is in par with the religion of Islam. Of course, with the adherence to certain adabs that have to exist for that advice to take effect in the heart of the one seeking it. And therefore, our discussion is of two areas. Number one, what is the meaning of maw'idah? And number two, how is the Quran considered to be maw'idah? Coming to the first area of our discussion, maw'idah, according to the linguistics or the scholars of linguistics of the language of the Arabic, they came forward and they said maw'idah means to advise. It means to tell someone of haqq, of what is true, to such an extent that you are able to guide them towards the truth so that they are able to adhere to the elements and the values of truth, and so that they are able to change their lives for the better. That's the meaning of maw'idah. In simple language, it means to advise, it means to preach or to admonish someone and to bring them towards the path of Islam, towards the path of haqq. Now someone may come forward and ask the question, if maw'idah means to advise, then how is that so different from nasiha? Because nasiha also means to advise. If maw'idah means to advise and nasiha means to advise, then what's the difference between the two? There is a fundamental difference between maw'idah and nasiha. And there is one fundamental difference, which is nasiha. When a person gives nasiha, when a person advises another, the person that is seeking the advice has no clue whatsoever. He has no prior knowledge to what he is asking for whatsoever. And so, when nasiha is given to another person who is seeking it, then that person, the person advising, is imparting knowledge upon the person who is seeking nasiha, seeking advice. Whereas maw'idah, you are not necessarily imparting knowledge on the person who is seeking the advice. Let me go into a bit more detail with regards to the differences or the intricate difference between nasiha and maw'idah. Within life, for example, say if I want to begin a business, if I want to start up a business, there are certain things that I need to pay attention to. Now, I have no idea intricacies of how to start a business, where to get a loan from, who provides the best loan, how to start up my accounts, for example, what areas I need to be aware of, what areas that could potentially be more costly for me, and so on and so forth. I go and I speak to a few handful of people to try and guide me of how I should start my business. Let me give you another example. You have a youth, and I've come across many youths in this day and age. When they finish their A-levels, they make one of the hardest decisions of their lives, which is to go towards university, for those who do go to university. Going to university and choosing a course of what to study for the next 3 to 4 years is a difficult decision to make. So you find some youths, for example, they see that they have the skill or they have interests in many different areas. You may not necessarily find a youth who has interest in one particular area and is determined and motivated to go down that particular route. Many of us, for example, and I've come across many youths, when they start university, they realize that the course that they've started is the wrong course. So they change. So you'll find a youth, for example, he will come forward and say, I am interested in mathematics, but I'm also interested in accounting. I'm interested in computer engineering, but at the same time, I'm interested in, for example, finance. I'm interested in pharmacy, but I can also do optometry. I'm interested in medicine, but I can also become a dentist. So you'll have a youth, a student who's interested in many different things. And therefore, they will go and seek advice. One of the reasons why many of our youths go to university after a year, 2 years, 3 years, then they feel regretful for choosing the course that they chose 2 to 3 years ago, 2 to 3 years prior. Why? Because of the lack of guidance that was given to them. So you'll find the youth will take a necessary step to go and ask people in the community, people who he knows, people who he knows are successful in their respected fields, and they will talk to them and try and find out answers, to try and find a solution to the challenge that they are facing, which is which course to do in the university. So when a person is seeking nasiha, it is not necessarily the case that he has prior knowledge. This person has no knowledge whatsoever. He has a challenge or a problem that he has come across, and he is trying to find a solution to that particular problem. When that solution is given to him, that is what is known as nasiha, advice. Maw'idha is different. Maw'idha, number one, it's different. Why? Because the advice is not in regards to dunya or the affairs of dunya. The advice is in respects to taqwa and what associates with taqwa. That's something important that we need to keep in mind. Whenever, for example, a person speaks about the heavens, and he speaks about the hell, and he speaks about the fires of hell and the adhab of Allah, of those who are in the fires of hell. Whenever you come across, for example, Nahjul Balagha, in which Amir al-Mu'mineen in countless sermons begins to speak about the dunya and the affairs of dunya and how deceptive it is and how attractive it is at the same time, and how he has divorced dunya many times over, for example. All of these come under the banner of Maw'idha. When you have, for example, a speaker who begins to speak about Fishar al-Qabr, or he speaks about Sakarat al-Maut, or when he speaks about adhering to the wajibat and refraining and abstaining from the muharramat, those things which are haram, all of that comes under the dimensions of Maw'idha. Maw'idha is not a person who imparts new knowledge to the person who is seeking it, but rather it is a reminder to the one who is listening to it. You find that amongst the language of the ulama, they say that Maw'idha is a tool or an instrument to remind the person what he has forgotten. Why forgotten? Because usually you observe our lives and the way we live our lives, many a times we are forgetful. Many a times we become heedless of our reality. We live in a state of ghafla. At times you find people in the world, and it surprises me how many people live in this particular way, where they wake up in the morning, they go to work, they choose to work long and long hours so that they earn more. Why should they earn more? So that they can go buy the new iPhones, they can go buy the new MacBooks, they can go buy, for example, the new iPads. They can keep buying and buying. Many people, for example, they work long hours to earn more money, to keep buying more things. This keeps the person away. It makes the person forgetful of his reality, of why he exists in dunya. It diverts his attention from something which is very important to something that has no importance whatsoever. And you find that in Nahjul Balagha, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam makes clear of this, that the dunya is deceptive. It attracts you and it traps you at the same time. When you refer to, for example, a person, or at times you find or you come across a person who has a million things to do in life. At times he has to focus on his family, he has to focus on his business, he has to focus on his bills, he has to focus on different areas. He has to make sure that those who are dependent on him are catered for and looked out for. He has a million things to focus on in his life. He doesn't have the time to sit down and to think about himself. He doesn't have the time to sit down and to try and see in which areas he can progress, in which areas he can advance and move closer to Allah. So when a maw'idah comes along my way, when a spiritual advice comes along my way, I can utilize it and try and remind myself. I can lift myself from this position of being in the state of ghafla and try and reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it is an opportunity that has come along my way. And that's why scholars, when they came forward, they said that one of the dangers that we need to look out for is the danger of ignoring a maw'adha when it comes towards my direction. In which way? You'll find, for example, a person who has not been in the center for many months. A person, naturally, when the centers are open, you don't see him coming and interacting in the center. He comes once in a while, once every few months, for example. It's been many months since he's come to the center. He comes to the center, he sits down, he listens to the majlis, the Maulana, the Sheikh, the Sayyid. When he delivers the lecture, his language is harsh. He speaks about adhab, and he speaks about the rewards of heaven, and he speaks about the fires of hell, and he speaks about all of these different things that even the Quran speaks about. But when this person listens to these words, he feels what? He feels angry, he feels pessimistic, he feels regretful for coming to the center. He says to himself, is there nothing more to Islam than hell and fires of hell and adhab and so on and so forth? You find that the Quran is full of this type of language, isn't it? So what do? Do we lock up the Quran and leave it in the shelves for it to never be opened? At times, this person may feel a maw'idah has come along his way. He may feel detached from the religion of Islam because of such advices. Now, of course, it would be the fault of the Maulana to speak about this constantly. But if the Maulana doesn't speak about this constantly, then it's no fault at him. He shouldn't be blamed for using such language or using such information that is provided within the Holy Quran as well. So you find that the scholars came forward and said that when you find a person who has been detached from the mosque, when he comes and sits down in the mosque and he listens to this and he is angered by these types of words, then these are the symptoms of qaswat al-qalb. Because a maw'idah has come along his way and it tries to remind him of things that he has forgotten, but he rejects it. And he rejects it, why? Because the reminder does not help him. Because he rejects it, why? Because he wants to reject the truth. He rejects the haqq. When haqq is given to the person on a silver platter, a person who suffers from qaswat al-qalb, this person will reject it altogether. That's why maw'idah, according to the language of the Quran and the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt, is extremely important. It revives the heart. Maw'idah is that which speaks to the heart of the human being. And that's why Amir al-Mu'mineen, in a fantastic hadith, he says, revive your hearts through maw'idah, through spiritual advices. There's an interesting story of a scholar by the name of Sayyid Muhammad Qadim al-Kazwini. They say he was a great speaker, a khatib of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. And one day, during the days of Ramadan, he went and he gave a lecture. And it would be usual for him to go from one center to another, delivering lectures consecutively. And so some of his family members narrate this story. They say he went to the center and he gave a lecture. When he finished the lecture, he came down from the minbar and he made his way to the second center to start his second lecture. And as they were walking with him, one of them realized that the Sayyid wasn't feeling very well. And so they asked him. He said, is everything all right? And the Sayyid says, no, I think I'm developing a fever. Of course, giving a lecture, it drains your energy, number one. And number two, because of the heat that was there in the room with the amount of people that were listening, it kind of raised his temperature and he was becoming sick. So one of them said to him, he said, Sayyid, now why don't you take a break? Go rest for a little while. You don't have to immediately go to the next center, to the next Husayniyah to deliver your lecture. Take a little break and then go and deliver your lecture. The Sayyid replied to him, he says, I'll tell you what happened to me two days ago. 2 days ago, a man came towards me and he began complaining to me. He said, Sayyidina, one of my neighbors, my neighbor is your follower. He comes and he listens to your lectures. He sits down and he engages with you and he learns a lot from you. Unfortunately, this same neighbor took a part of my land away from me. Ghasab, he usurped my right, my property, and he's refusing it to give it back. Perhaps the next time you sit on the mimbar, maybe you could share a few words of wisdom about the awaqib of the usurper, the final end or the repercussions and the consequences of those who take away the rights of others. So the Sayyid, he replies, he said, sure, I'll do whatever it's in my capacity to help. So I sat on the mimbar and I began to deliver a majlis, and I shared words about those who take away the rights of others. I shared ahadith and ayats of the Holy Quran explaining and examining the end of those who oppress. I said, last night this person came back to me. And when he came back to me, he was grateful. He said, Ya Sayyid, Jazakum Allahu Khair al-Jaza. My neighbor, he heard your lecture. And it struck him so much so that he came back to me, he apologized, and he gave me my land back. Maw'idha has the ability to grab insan, remind the human being, awaken the heart of the human being, and bring him back to Sirat al-Haq. But that is if we want that to happen in our lives. Now let's come to the second area of the discussion very quickly. Why is the Quran considered to be maw'idah? You'll find that there are many verses in the Holy Quran. For example, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, هَذَا بَيَانٌ لِلنَّاسِ وَهُدًى وَمَوْعِظَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That this Quran is a bayan for the insan, but it's also a guide. Huda wal maw'ida, it is a spiritual advice, it is a spiritual counsel for the muttaqin. You have, for example, Ya ayyuhan nas, qad ja'atkum maw'idatum min rabbikum. He says, the ayah of the Quran says, this book has been given to you, O Annas, which is considered to be a maw'ida. It is a spiritual advice for you, O human being. وَالشِّفَاءُ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ. It is a cure for the dirt or the sins that accumulate in the heart. In a third verse, for example, عُدْعُوا إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ. And guide towards your Lord and bring people towards the path of your Lord through hikmah and maw'idatil hasana, good counsel, good advice. So you find, according to these verses, the Quran is considered to be a maw'idah. The Quran is considered to be a spiritual advisor. The question is, if the Quran is a spiritual advisor, who is it advising? It's advising the ruh of the human being. It's advising the nafs of the human being. Look at this verse. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idatil hasana. Allama Tabatabai gives an incredible tafsir of this particular verse. He says, the Quran, number one, is a book of wisdom. Yasin wal Quran al Hakim. Tilka ayatul kitab al Hakim. The Quran is a book of wisdom. Wisdom, hikmah, is that which appeals the intellect of the human mind. It speaks to the mind of the human being. It speaks to the intellect. It gives instructions. It gives advices of how you should behave in this world. The Quran is the language of the intellect. We spoke a couple of nights ago. We said that hikmah is when I have challenges in my life, I try and find the right solutions for these problems. Hikmah helps me find the right solutions to these problems when I use my intellect. But it's also a hidayatul linnas, hudal linnas. You find, for example, in the same verse, Allah says, wa maw'idatil hasana. It is a spiritual advisor. Advises what? The ruh. Maw'idah is what appeals to my heart. It appeals to my ruh. It appeals to my emotions and my nafs. Look how incredible this Quran is. That number one, it speaks to the intellect of the human being, but it also speaks to the soul of the human being. It reminds me, it awakens my heart. It reminds me those aspects and elements which I have forgotten. And that's why, being the nights of Ramadan, we should encourage ourselves to read the Holy Quran if possible, because we may feel that it is a one-sided relationship, that I take the Quran, I open it and I read it. But there is another relationship that is taking place, and that relationship is, number one, the Quran is speaking, it is interacting with my aql, and at the same time it is interacting with my ruh. We may not see it, but it is most definitely taking place, and we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to increase our interactions with the Holy Quran, especially in these days and in these nights. وآخر الدعوان الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.